After living in China for quite a long time and coming from a Western colonial country, one thing immediately blew my mind once I really thought about it. Why was it that in China, I was able to visit massive regions over 1 million kilometers squared, or villages trapped in mountains, that still had their millennia-old cultures and languages completely intact? I'm talking about Xinjiang, Tibet, Inner Mongolia, Guangdong, Yunnan, Guizhou, etc. How the F could that be possible? Because this scenario is literally science fiction or fantasy in a Western country. It seriously is, like Hollywood literally makes movies about finding places like this. I'm thinking of Wakanda in Black Panther or Alien Worlds in Avatar. These movies are fantastic because they're about finding culturally rich, powerful, and ancient cultures in a special land where these people are safe from an overpowered hegemon, the US. But how ironic that it is our Western culture that is the reason why these ancient nations don't exist on our lands anymore. For example, not even 130 years ago, at Wounded Knee, we were still Gaza-like massacring our ancient peoples, only to fantasize and wax artistically about them in movies a few decades later. To put it simply, we are a perverted and psychotic culture for doing so. But back to my story. I was born and raised in Toronto, Canada, and the only remnants we have of ancient Canadian culture that existed here for tens of thousands of years before Europeans arrived is basically just the names of our places. For example, Toronto means meeting place in Huron, or it means the place where trees sit in the water in Mohawk. In our country, Canada actually just means village in Huron and Iroquois. So even the name of my so-called colonial country is just a European misunderstanding. Now, what is so effing sad is that when I say the names of original Canadians or Americans like Iroquois, Huron, Mohawk, Ojibwe, how do we feel? Well, we likely get all these adventurous, exotic Indiana Jones type feelings up in our Western brains. A colonial orgasm, I'm gonna call it. When we hear Mohawk, Sioux, Huron, Cree, etc., many Westerners, like myself, either imagine an idyllic ancient culture who lived in harmony with their environment, or a backward group of low IQ savages. But no matter how you react to these names of original Canadians, it's unspeakably tragic that that's all we are able to do now. Just imagine them. Because all these ancient cultures have been virtually wiped off the face of the earth, either through disease, genocide, or forced transfer to reservations. Now, I'm not saying that there are not any First Nation survivors left who are trying to preserve what tiny shreds are left of their culture, while small numbers still survive. But the fact is, the genocide of our original peoples was successful, and this genocide inspired Hitler and his Nazis. So that's precisely how China is better than the USA. In China, you can see, feel, live, eat, drink, and intermingle in ancient cultures, which have existed in relative harmony with the other 56 ethnic minority groups in China for centuries and sometimes even millennia. You could right now buy a ticket to Xinjiang, Inner Mongolia, Yunnan, Beijing, Guizhou, indirectly to Tibet, and immediately dive into a culture that is 100% still alive, still evolving, and proud of its language and unique ways of experiencing our world. This simple fact alone makes me appreciate and respect China and its government so much, as they've been able to do something many cultures haven't even tried to do. The many ethnic groups living inside today's People's Republic of China have been able to live in harmony despite their obvious differences. So now I'd like to make a bold and possibly life-changing challenge to all of you who believe you've already made up your mind on China or Russia or Iran, Pakistan, or any other country that the criminal media demonizes on the daily. And I challenge you to grab a small amount of courage and go and see that country for yourself. I myself currently live in mainland China, and I can say with 100% certainty that if you buy a ticket and spend a week or two here, you will completely change your mind on this country. Now, I'm not saying that China is perfect and that everything here is amazing and squeaky clean, because it's not. There are rundown and not so great parts of China, which I've talked about in other videos. But I can guarantee that you will see things, people, and places that will leave an impression on your mind for many years, maybe even a lifetime. If you're fortunate enough to have the means and time to travel to China, I would suggest you go to Beijing and see one of the key tourist areas in China, which is called the Central Axis of Beijing, because so many important places reside on this ancient urban plan. Really cool fact, the Central Axis of Beijing was designed almost 800 years ago by a Chinese architect who based his ideas on a 2,400-year-old Chinese book, which talked about Chinese philosophy, design, and planning. Pretty crazy, right? And for that reason, the Central Axis is an 8 kilometers, almost perfectly straight line in the ancient capital, which is home to some of the most important places in China, like the Forbidden City, built in the Ming Dynasty 600 years ago, as well as modern places like Tiananmen Square, the place where the great CIA PSYOP was created, which fooled the whole world with a skewed narrative, which, you can hear about that in other places. Another reason I chose to feature the Central Axis of Beijing is because it's just been inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List just 4 days ago, actually, becoming China's 59th World Heritage Site. Here's a quote from UNESCO. Beijing's Central Axis, a building and ensemble exhibiting the ideal order of the Chinese capital, was included at the 46th session of the World Heritage Committee in New Delhi, India on July 27th. With its roots dating back to the paradigm of ideal capital planning in traditional Chinese culture, the Beijing Central Axis shows an ensemble of building complexes and archaeological sites that governs the overall layout of Beijing's old city.
In 1271 AD, Kublai Khan, the founding emperor of the Yuan dynasty, decided to build a new imperial city on the ruins of the old capital, Zhongdu. As the city's chief planner, the emperor appointed an architect named Liu Bingzhong. Liu studied the mountains and waters in the area and decided to build a city around a specific center. By doing so, he was following the guidelines set out in the Caogongji, or Artificer's Record, a classic work compiled between the 5th and 3rd centuries BC. The Caogongji stated that establishing the center of a city should be of overriding importance. Based on his study of the landscape, Liu determined the location of the new city. He then designed an axis running along the Shuchai High Lakes area. He ordered that a pavilion be built on this axis to mark the city's geometric center.
古代城市水是生命线，没有水，这个城市就活不了。忽必烈了，他有这种逐水草而居的这样的习惯啊，是吧？他所以一定要选一个有水的地方。那么北京就形成了我们今天的这个轴线，从南到北啊，然后水系从西向东啊，跟它形成了一种交汇的关系。